autism for pretty much since the beginning. Barbara's an autism mom. She was employed for 15 years as a youth services librarian at the Ferguson Library in Stamford, Connecticut, where she promoted and developed library services for young people with disabilities and their families. She's led workshops for librarians on how to work with and program for children and teens with autism, and presented at conferences on related subjects. She's the author of 2 books, including The Programming for Children and Teens with Autism Spectrum Disorder and The Secret Rules of Social Networking, a resource for teens and young adults with autism and other social skills deficits that outlines the unstated rules that guide relationships both in person and online. In 2016, Barbara started the Autism Welcome Here Library Program Services and More grant program, which awards $5,000 a year to support projects and services in libraries that benefit people with autism or their families directly or indirectly. And today, Barbara's going to share some tips on writing successful grant proposals. So, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ross. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I don't think that was
Oh, no.
The one to the left of the terminal.
All right. Good. So actually, this presentation was written a little bit for librarians, but even if you're not a librarian, I hope you can hang in with me, including the self-advocates in the room. And some of that is because I know we were hearing today a lot from people about what we can all do to advocate, and I just want to encourage all of us to leave with one thing in mind that we'd like to do. And the one thing you could do is to actually bring these ideas to the library in your community, even if you're not a librarian. So just to keep that in mind. And also some of the things I'm going to share are useful to you if you want to write a grant for any purpose, not just a library grant. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk about how to make your vision a reality, because I know for me sitting here, I've had all these ideas sparked in my mind. I want to do this and I want to do that, and we need to have this happen, and we need to do that happen. But as we all know, to make a lot of these things happen, what do we need? We need the bucks. We need the money. And for those of you who don't know, this is Tom Cruise from a 1996 film called Jerry Maguire, and Show Me the Money became what, they weren't called memes in those days, but it was a meme, and it got around. So anyway, that's what we need. We need the money. So how does that happen? So part of what I'm going to talk about first is this grant that I started, and it's called Autism Welcome Here, Library Programs, Services, and More. And actually, it was an outgrowth of the very first Targeting Autism Forum. So that's where I got the aha. And I was at the forum, I presented that year, and then I helped facilitate some of the breakout sessions. And at every breakout session I was in, I would hear the same refrain from people, and it was, I've gotten lots of great ideas here, I want to go back and do them, but we can't do this in my library because we don't have the resources. We just don't have the resources, we don't have the money to do this, whatever. And I had this thought, and I've been thinking for a while about doing some kind of more up close and personal charitable contributions of my own. And this kind of gave me the idea that this is the way that I wanted to do that, would be to create a grant that would fund libraries that wanted to do something to make people with autism more welcoming in their libraries. And, you know, just in that whole idea of if you provide the money, they will come, you know. And I knew that because I'd been involved in some other library grants, and just that if people know there's some kind of funding source out there, they're much more likely to come up with an idea. And so that's how the idea started. And I put together a committee. Initially it actually was people who were all at the forum. Several of them are in the room or were here this weekend. And I was so fortunate to meet this incredible caliber of people to get this level of expertise involved in the grant from the beginning. So I wasn't doing this on my own at all. And it was very clear as we started to talk about how this should happen, that it should be in honor of, this is Meg Kalaya, or what's Meg Kalaya. She was co-founder with Dan Weiss on something called Libraries and Autism Were Connected, which operated out of New Jersey, and they were pioneers actually in bringing the autism community and the library community together. And they created a website, which does exist now, called Libraries and Autism Were Connected, and actually, thanks to Dan, we were able to host the grant on that website. So I'll give you the URL in a few minutes and you can see where that's located. So we found the perfect home for the grant. And we do have, Adria is on our committee, we do have a self-advocate, Deborah's on our committee, so we did try to get some representation at least from communities of color and librarians from a number of different kinds of library backgrounds. So hopefully we could at least represent the issue fairly. And both, I'm an autism mom, both my adult sons have autism, and Suzanne, if I can help you as well, Suzanne is as well. So we felt like the community was as well represented as we were able to make it be. Unfortunately, Meg has since passed, so the grant is now in her memory, and we hope that that does honor her. So each year, as Ross said, we have $5,000 to distribute, and any U.S. or Canadian library can apply. Initially, it was only U.S., and then we actually had some Canadian people come to the forum and say, we want to apply. So, okay, fine, Canada too. So we're very, we're not about being exclusive here. We're about being inclusive. We want it to be as broad as possible. So we accept projects for any age group. People say, well, just kidding. No, any age group, any kind of library. It could be a new program or an already existing initiative. And if many of you know who've applied for grants, often it's just, if it's nothing new, they don't want to hear about it. And we don't care if you've already been doing something and you're going to make it better, we're interested. So, let us know. But it must benefit autistic people or their families directly or indirectly. And what I mean by indirectly is if you want to do a proposal to train your whole staff so that your library will be more welcoming to people with autism, yeah, you're not doing a direct service program. But as far as I'm concerned, that's totally valid, and I'm interested in seeing your proposal. So who applied? So we've just finished up the 4th year of the grant, and over that time we've had applications from public, academic, school, and special libraries, every kind of library there is. We've heard from large urban systems and small rural libraries, and I didn't do an exact count, this was just sort of from the last year, so about 27 states, more or less, 3 Canadian provinces, and except for 1 year that was kind of a fluke with low, we've been averaging around 60 applications a year from places I didn't expect, Mississippi, Alabama, pockets of the country that I didn't think were onto this, that I'm just amazed seeing the level of need and the level of interest, and frankly, some of the applications have broken my heart. And I wish I could have funded every single one of them. The need is so intense, but we really have been very, very careful, reading these very diligently to really pick the best uses of the money in the programs where we thought they could do the best good and also be something that could be replicable in other libraries, in other communities. So I'm not going to go through what the individual winners were over the 4 years because you can find them at the website in a lot more detail than I'm going to be able to give you now. And I don't think it's a really good use of my time to talk about something you can go right there online and see. So, but in the more general kinds of ways, and is everyone with me? I want to make sure I'm not talking too fast for people or in ways you can't follow. Thanks. So just in general, so we've given a grant to 1 community college, 1 autism agency, and 4 public libraries. Not bad, over 4 years. 3 of them were programs for young children, 1 for an elementary school age group, 1 for teens, and 1 for college students. So you notice what we haven't heard from so far are adult programs. And I've heard a lot about that over the course of the forum today, so just if you're a librarian in the room and you've got a good plan to serve adults with autism in your library, please, please, please write a grant because we are looking for good adult programs to fund. And we're just not getting them. In truth, the majority of the applications we receive are for children's programs, especially for sensory storytime programs, and I hate to say it, often for bad sensory storytime programs, sadly. But at least the people want to do something, and they've heard sensory storytime, they've heard the term. For those of you who aren't librarians and don't know what that is, sensory storytime, I'll just do a little aside. But sensory storytime is a kind of storytime that a number of librarians came up with that integrated basically some activities from sensory integration occupational therapy into a library storytime format. And So the people who do it right do that, and they use visuals and they understand sensory integration issues. The people who do it wrong heard sensory and are doing sensory bombardment, you know, which is a little bit frightening. But, you know, they are well-intentioned, and they, you know, I give them definitely the A for effort. But we really are trying to promote the correct way of doing the programming, because we know that's what folks need. So anyway, so in 2019, we just gave 2 awards. We just picked the winners and let the people know, like March 1st, so we don't know yet what's coming out of these. So, and these aren't on the website yet, although there is a press release. So one is Oceanside Public Library, and they got the bulk of the money this year. And they're doing something called Autism-Friendly Lending Library and Family Events. So it's basically serving children in Oceanside with autism and their families. And what we liked about it is a very comprehensive plan. They involve a lot of community stakeholders, a ton, including, and I was particularly impressed by this, but they have a large military base in Oceanside, and they got the military base involved, and that's the first time I've seen that, because there's a whole other issue with military families. If you can imagine how hard it is to live in one community and have autism, imagine what it's like being part of a military family and moving around all the time.
They do have a really strong autism community within the military in San Diego and Oceanside.
Yep.
Oceanside is right close to San Clemente.
Great.
So they've really done a fantastic job for the military families with autism. So I'm really happy to see this.
And their autism
library.
person is partnering with the public library on this initiative. So, and the other one, just to be on the complete other side of things, which is what we like to do, is a middle school in Modesto, California, and I just pretend you're still seeing that. And it's the Evelyn Henshaw Middle School in Modesto, and they're doing something called the Teen Titans Club. And it's basically an inclusive social skills club during lunch break. It's going to happen every other week, and it's going to be students with autism and non-autism, and they're going to do different games and things with them. And we thought that was fabulous, and so we thought that was worth $1,000, and we gave them the other grant. So if you are with a library, or you know someone who's with a library, or you live in a town with a library, or you work at a school with a library, or anybody with a library, you can apply to. And this is where you get the information about the grant, all of our application criteria, what we're looking for. We've really tried to make the application process pretty simple. You know, we do ask some questions, but we're not onerous at all. And so please do spread the word. If you do have social media and you can get the word out to other libraries, please do. You know, one problem we'd love to have would be to get too many applications for us to deal with.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, something we'll work out if we get there. But it's been a labor of love, I think, for me, and Renee was on the committee in the past, and Suzanne, I think I've heard that from other people on the committee. And I've also heard that from people who have been recipients, and most recently, I just want to read this one thing that we heard from them, if I have it here. I don't. Well, I'll just paraphrase it. But one of the winners this past year was an autism agency in British Columbia called Autism BC. And they are the major repository of information for families with autism for the entire province, basically. And they had a program where they were going to teach grandparents over a series of workshops to do early literacy activities with their grandchildren who had autism. And we thought that was a great idea, and we funded that. And in her final report, we heard from the project manager, and she basically thanked us and said that working on this initiative was the highlight of her career, and she thanked us for giving her the opportunity to do that. Mm-hmm. So if you are a librarian and you have a thought, you know, we want to give you the highlight of your career. So please develop it. And you know, the other thing I want to say is one of the things about the grant is we know we can't fund a lot of projects, but the hope is that if a library is going to go to the trouble of thinking of something and developing it and getting the buy-in from their administrator, which is what we require for the application, and really plotting it out, and even if they don't get selected, they're going to say, gee, we already had this good idea, it's all fleshed out, let's find another way to make it happen. So that's going to lead into a little bit of the rest of what I'm going to talk about, which is going to be about applications in general, because not only with this grant, but as I said, I've been involved with other grants. I've written and co-written some successful grants, and I was involved with helping to develop and evaluate another ALS grant through the American Library Association. So I've read a lot of grants, and you know, I see repeatedly librarians do not know how to write grants, nor should they necessarily. I mean, they're not trained in grant writing, but they do the best they can. But I thought what I have not seen anywhere, and what I'd like to spend a few minutes with here, is some of the just tricks of the trade that I've learned from my own experience. And this will be a little bit of an overview, but I'm happy to answer more questions later, or grab me in the hall, or write to me. So the first of these fall under the category called do your homework. So, you know, treat a grant application like you would a term paper, you know, and do that level of work for it and that level of care. So first thing is, don't wait to get the money to plan. And I can't tell you how many applications I see where they say, if we win this grant, we are going to reach out in our community. No. Reach out in your community first. Let us know who your partners are going to be. Let us know they have buy-in if you get the money. And then maybe you can have some money. But guaranteed, if you tell me you want the money first and then you're going to figure it out, I am not going to give you any money. Second, use Google. So like when I'm talking about bad plans for sensory story time, all you have to do is go on Google and Google sensory story time, and you will get about hundreds of hits about all kinds of ways people are. Do a little research, especially if you're a librarian, we know how to do research, right? Do your homework, see what's already out there before you reinvent the wheel, and build on what's already there. So do a little research first. And as we've all said repeatedly, talk to your community. Involve self-advocates and other stakeholders. We all think we have great ideas. I'm one of them. And then if you field test them in the real world, you find out they aren't such great ideas, or they aren't what people want. So find out what your community really wants, not what just is your good idea, and see how you can provide that. Make sure your plan will work. We actually had one application this year, which I personally loved in many ways, but we didn't give it a grant, and it was a plan, and I'm sharing this partially because maybe someone will do it and do it in a way that could be fundable. But this was a fairly rural community that had a new bookmobile, and they already had an autism resource center in the library, in the physical library, and they wanted money to do an autism resource center on their bookmobile. Sounded fabulous. But then when we started to really examine it and parse it out, the only person they were going to have on the bookmobile was the driver. They weren't going to have a librarian or anybody with a training or expertise. And they were going to have things like weighted vests on that Autism Resource Center on the bookmobile. And we went, we are not giving you money to hand out weighted vests to people who don't know how to use them, and with nobody there to even ask a question. And so it was really reluctantly that we had to put that on the no pile. So it's just an example of, you have to think it through. Is this a workable plan? Is this going to work in the real world with what we're planning to do? And I have other examples. So, you know, really think it through, ask people questions. Can we do this and really have this work for people? You know, we've talked a lot about, excuse me, for people who don't like sounds, I apologize. Avoid outdated and offensive terms. You know, and I constantly feel a little bit one behind the eight ball. I originally had in these slides people with autism. You know, I was a people first language trained, you know, but I've been listening to people over the last 2 days, and I noticed that those of you with autism call yourself autistic people. And I thought, okay, that's what we're going with. And so, you know, if somebody can't do some of that basic stuff, and I know we can get it wrong, but there's some that are really, you know, terms we've abandoned a decade ago. You know, if you're still using terms that have been abandoned a decade ago by this autism community, then you don't know enough to really be managing a grant for the autism community. And if you don't know, ask the people in the community. And please provide local, recent statistics and description of need. If I can't tell you how many grants I read that gave me the latest CDC number when I asked for your target population, You know, one of those, if I had a nickel for everyone, I'd be rich, right? So, no, every community has its own local statistics. You can get them through your school district, you can get them through the community survey of the census data. There's various ways to find out what's actually going on in your community, and that's what people want to know. So some more tips. Your budget should equal your grant narrative. So if there's anything in your budget that you didn't talk about when you describe what your plan is, that's not a good thing. So if you tell me everything that you want to do, and then I read your budget, and your budget says you need iPads, and I said, wait a minute, where did they talk about the iPads? And no, they never talked about iPads. You know, you're probably not going to get funded, and you sure as heck aren't going to get those iPads. So make sure you talk about the iPads and how you plan to use them. And please don't pad your budget. You know, grant readers are not dumb. And, you know, so writing a grant is not the chance, oh boy, let's figure out everything else we've needed for the library and see if we can stick it in this grant, maybe they won't notice. They'll notice, you know. So please don't do that, it hurts your chances. It really hurts your chances, doesn't help. Be creative and innovative, and that's even if you're doing something that, you know, a million people have done before. So I'm not saying I wouldn't fund sensory story time, I would, even though bunches of people. But you gotta have some kind of new twist on it. You know, you gotta do it, you gotta add to the conversation a little bit. You know, put your own twist on it a little bit, even if it's something already being done, that's fine. But, you know, think outside the box. Please answer the questions that are being asked, and all of them. Because certainly with our grant, we have it, if you skip a question, you're out. And you could have written the most wonderful thing ever, but if you skip a question, you're on the no pile. You know, and many other grantors will be even harsher. But I can't tell you how many times we've asked questions. Well, and the worst one is, what are you planning to do? And the entire narrative is how wonderful they are and everything they've already done. I don't want to know what I have another question called, what have you already done? You know, I want to know what you want to do. So read the question carefully, and also if you're applying for a grant, don't say, I know you don't really fund da-da-da, but let me tell you why you should fund. You know, most grants are pretty good at advertising what kinds of things they're looking for and what kinds of things they want to fund. And if you don't fit in that criteria, don't bother. Really, you're wasting your time. So, but there will be some other grant that's interested in funding the kind of thing you're looking to get funded. And please, 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 proofread your submission twice. I can't tell you how embarrassed, I mean, if the people saw, they'd be embarrassed to see that they're submitting something with multiple typos. And, you know, and I think the most egregious I saw here was once we were reading a grant application, and I kid you not, in one of the answers, there was an ellipsis, and inside it said, check with so-and-so for the answer. And they didn't proof it enough to realize they never got the answer from whoever that was, and they just left that in the submitted application. Don't do that. I mean, that's not enough for my grant anyway, for this grant. We wouldn't completely ding you for that, but it doesn't help. It doesn't help your case. So that's that about that. So there's maybe more, and there's other people in this room, I'm sure, who have as much of a grant reading and writing experience than me. I know I couldn't cover everything in the time we had. But just the last thing I want to leave you with is, if you don't get this grant or any other one you apply for, please don't give up. I think we heard a lot over the course of the forum about persevering, and that's true. We're looking for money too. So again, I only have a couple minutes, but I'm going to give you just a few thoughts about that. Places to look. So the first one is the Foundation Center tool visualizing funding for libraries. Foundation Center is a fabulous organization that's a repository of foundation information. They usually charge big bucks to use their services. They have, out of the goodness of their hearts, come up with a free tool for librarians that shows foundations that have supported library projects. You know, you could search it in any one of a number of different ways. So you can find out which funding foundations have given grants in your library, in your state, in your community, for what kinds of projects. You know, it may take a little bit of work, but if you want to chase down some foundations to go after, it's an excellent, excellent tool for you to use. If you live in a community that's got a Best Buy store nearby, within 25 miles, and your library is, kind of doing cutting-edge tech stuff for teens particularly, you might qualify for a Best Buy Foundation grant. If you want to do something with tech for teens with autism, that's teaching coding in some special way, I bet they haven't gotten any of those kind of proposals, and they might really welcome one, and Best Buy might be a good place to look at. There are, I found this one, I'm sure there's other ones like this, things like the Autism Societies and Autism Association. This one, if you're in Central Illinois, gives $500 mini grants. Maybe that's all you need to kickstart a little program you want to do. That might be something to look at. And don't forget, local businesses, often local banks have foundations, not the big, Bank of America's, but there are community banks in every community. Often they have foundations and they're happy to fund these kinds of things. Service providers, we're talking about things like sensory story time. Go to your local occupational therapist and ask them if they've got some equipment they can give you. Go to a physical therapist and ask them for TheraBands. Just collect stuff. Go to the toy store and say, can you give me, a few whatevers. You don't have to do things with a lot of money. Reach out in your community. You'd be surprised people want to do things. And the obvious one, your friends group, other kinds of places. So be creative about getting money. I think people in this room are fairly passionate about wanting to serve this population. And I guess what I'm just here to tell you is if you are, you can find the money to do what you need to do. And more there's places out there that are willing to support you to do that. And that includes me, so that's me. And I mean that, and I do say this to people, I mean it, absolutely. If you're writing a funding proposal, or you have questions or something, anything you think I can help with, please reach out to me. To the extent that I'm able to, I want to be a resource for you, and I think there are probably other people in this room who would offer the same.